Hello again, Josh here at Get Real Audio in Bath, and this is episode 5 of my basic home recording series. And in this one we're going to focus on software. The type of software we generally use to record, edit and mix music is called DAW software. Some people refer to it as DAW. That stands for Digital Audio Workstation. There are loads of different DAWs out there. The common ones are Pro Tools and Logic and Cubase, Ableton Live. Every now and again I come across FL Studio and Presonus Studio One. There are more specialist and expensive versions called Pyramix and Sequoia. And there are some incredibly basic ones like Audacity, which isn't really suitable for our needs. And there are 2 free DAWs, which I'd suggest you get started with. The one that's free on the Apple operating system is called Garageband, and it's free in the App Store. And the one that I'm going to focus on today is on the Windows operating system, and it's called Cakewalk by Bandlab. Okay, so I've downloaded the Cakewalk by Bandlab application, and this is the screen that you're presented with when you start it. And these different templates represent the kinds of projects that you could create. So I'm going to just launch this basic template, and it will create for me 2 simple tracks that I can work on. So this section here operates as a timeline. So when I press play, it will just move along the timeline, just like any other playback device. And these 2 are different tracks, so they could be different strands of your music. Now the 2 kinds of tracks they've made are an audio track, which can record sound from a microphone, and a MIDI track, which is designed to capture data from a MIDI controller keyboard, which can then be used to create sound using one of the software synthesizers or piano emulation tools built into the software. We're not going to look at that kind of track today, so I'm just going to delete that track. And that, by the way, was a right click, which brought up the menu to delete the tracks. I'll delete this one as well, and then we can show you how to start from the beginning by creating a new track. So to create a new track, I just go to the Insert menu and click Audio Track, and it will make me 1 new audio track. I can make it bigger if I want to see more of the features, or I can make it smaller if I've got loads of tracks in my project and I need to create more space. Before we go any further, I'm going to save this project, and then we'll have a little look at the anatomy of a project. So I'm just going to go File, Save As you would any other kind of computer file. It's automatically taken me to the Cakewalk projects file, which exists on the root level of your C drive in Windows. And I'm going to create a project in there called My Test Project. Save. So if I go back to the C drive, and we'll have a look at the contents. So this is the full contents of my C drive, and here's the Cakewalk projects folder. And inside there we've got a folder called My Test Project. So this is how a DAW program stores its data generally. There are 2 different ways that it can do it, but this is the most common. It will be a folder containing a project file. This is a Cakewalk project file, and usually there'll be a folder called audio or audio files. This one's currently empty because I haven't recorded any audio yet. If I go back to Cakewalk project, and I'll have a look at the one that I'm going to show you in a moment. This is a project I made called guitar recording, and inside that audio folder there are 2 audio files, and we'll have a look at those in a moment. So the important thing to remember, if you want to move these projects around from computer to computer, is this file, this Cakewalk project file, doesn't contain all of the data you need to play the file back. You also need the audio folder. So you'll have to go back 1 level and take this entire folder, the guitar recording or the My Test Project, the whole project folder. So it's a slightly confusing, if you're not used to dealing with the types of files that contain what we might call media assets, then this is a little bit confusing. But video software is very similar in this respect. There'll be a project file of some kind and a folder full of video files, essentially. So here is my guitar recording project, which I've created earlier, and I'll just show you around the software before we go any further. Before you make a recording, you'll need to do a few little bits of setup. Some of this is done in the preferences window, which is accessed with this button here. The first thing you'll need to set up is your sound card. Now, when I connected my sound card, Cakewalk automatically recognized it when I then launched Cakewalk. So I connected the sound card first, left Windows to work out what it was, and then I started Cakewalk, and it already knew the audio hardware. It had it in here. It was already ticked. But you may need to select the appropriate input and output. So if you have a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 connected, then you might need to select the appropriate checkboxes to allow the inputs and outputs to function. So I'm using the built-in audio at the moment because I don't have my sound card connected. I'm just listening via headphones. So the first major learning experience here will be to do with resolution. So resolution refers to the quality that you're going to record your audio at. And the two bits of information you need to know are the bit depth and the sample rate. And I would recommend working at a bit depth of 24 bits and a sample rate of 48 kilohertz or 44.1 kilohertz is also fine. Cakewalk by default works at 16 bits, which I don't think is enough. So all we need to do is go to two of these windows. We're going to go to the driver settings window, and we'll change the sampling rate to 48,000. That's 48 kilohertz. And then we'll go to the audio data window, and we'll change the record bit depth to 24 bit. And that's it. That's you set up for resolution. So when you make a recording on a track, there's a few things you need to do. A choice you're going to have to make is whether or not to record using a click track, otherwise known as a metronome. The metronome settings are all over here. So I quite enjoy working without a metronome. I think it lets the music breathe more easily, and I also think if you're inexperienced with working with a click track, it can really put you off, and actually you end up being a slave to the click rather than actually performing a fluid piece of music. So often I like to work without metronome if it's going to do a better job. So these buttons here will turn the metronome off during playback for this one and recording on this one. And this is how to access the metronome settings. So I've just turned both of these switches off. I think they were on by default. Another thing you're going to want to change is this timeline here is in bars and beats, which is irrelevant if we're not actually referring to the software's metronome. So what I can do here is I can add a ruler in hours, minutes, seconds and frames, and then I can remove the bars and beats ruler. So now we have 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. It's actually something that's useful to us, the amount of time. I'm just going to close this window over here to give us a bit more space. These are the zoom tools down here, so I can zoom in an awfully long way into my waveform if I like, or I can show the whole thing in the window at once. I can also make the waveform larger. So I've already made a recording here and the waveform doesn't look very big. If I want to see more detail, I can click in this vertical ruler here, which is showing decibels, and I can just zoom it. It's not actually going to make it any louder, but it does make it more easy to see. So for editing purposes, that will be quite handy later on. So in order to make a recording, I need to decide whether this track is going to be stereo or mono. If you only have one microphone plugged in and it's recording one instrument, then that will want to be a mono track. By default, Cakewalk made a stereo track for me. So in order to change that, I need to expand this column on the left-hand side and show the track. And now in this column here, I now have a choice between mono and stereo. This is the master output, which will always be stereo because it's designed to be connected to two loudspeakers. And it's showing the symbol for stereo here. It's known as the interleaving setting in this particular software. That's different in other DAWs. And this is the symbol for mono. So if I click this, it's going to make that into a stereo track. If I click it again, it makes it a mono track. So these are the controls for the Guitar One track, which I've named simply by double-clicking on the name box there. So if I want to make this Guitar One track mono, then I just have to make sure it has the mono symbol, that one there. Then I need to set an input, and I can choose from whichever microphone inputs are available with your particular hardware. It'll look different on your computer. That's that box there. And now I can press the record arm button in order to see some input. Now at the moment it's just seeing the input from my internal microphone in my computer. We can choose to play that sound back out of the output that you've chosen, which may be appropriate, but usually you'll experience a delay if you press that button. So I would advise you to either use the direct input monitoring switch on the front panel of your audio interface, or if it comes with a piece of software like the ID software I showed you before, or Focusrite Control, then use that for your monitoring, not this. If you want to be doubly safe, then you can press the mute button in here as well, and that will stop the audio from leaving the DAW so that you can listen to it somewhere else. So that arms the track, and the record button up here begins the recording. So I've made a recording here. I think it starts with me counting it in, and then there's a full start, and then I counted it again, and then there's the music. I played that take, and then I think I wanted to do a second take because I wasn't entirely happy with it. And all you need to do in Cakewalk to make a second take is simply record again from the same place. So I simply just press that record button a second time. It looks like it's recording over the previous recording, but it's not. It's actually recording a second take. These takes are considered to be virtual tracks in DAW software. And they all exist underneath the main track, which is the one that we'll create our edit on. So once we're happy with the takes we've recorded and we think we have enough to make a good edit from them, which is also known as a compilation or a comp, we can then look at our takes. This is the take lanes button, and here is my first recording and my second recording. They're different lengths, they begin in different places, but I started at the same tempo, therefore I should be able to make a good edit between the two. It's something I find quite consistent amongst musicians, is almost regardless of the tempo they start a piece of music at, they would tend to settle into the same feel and tempo after a few bars. And even if the piece of music speeds up and slows down, I've never really had a lot of trouble editing between two or more takes in order to make a good comp. Sometimes there can be an issue, particularly if somebody feels after take 3 that the piece is too slow and everyone speeds up, then of course it becomes quite difficult to edit between the two. So it's possible now to solo each of the takes in turn so that I can listen to which one I like. I've already listened to both of these takes and I've decided that I like the one that's called Record 2, so it's obviously the second take that I did. But there are a few mistakes, so what I should do now is listen through this performance and just mark where the problems are that I'd like to fix using the other take. And in this software I just press the M key in order to make a marker. So here goes, I'll hit play and then I'll make markers as I go. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. So that's the full start. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. So I marked 4 things to repair there. I also noticed there was a rather loud click over here where the pick struck the top of the guitar. Although I've tinkered with the settings a little bit, I have found Cakewalk to be slightly glitchy when you play back for the first couple of seconds, and then it seems to settle down. Don't be too concerned by that. I mean, okay, it is a free piece of software, but when you export the file as a final mix, it sounds absolutely fine. So now, in order to edit between these 2 takes, the first thing I need to do is put them in time. So I'm going to find the beginning of the real take. So this is the full start. The real take starts somewhere over here, I believe. I'm going to zoom in a bit and just double check that. Let's zoom in on that take a little bit. Yes, that was the beginning there. I'll make a marker. Again, I'm just going to press M. When it's stopped, it'll allow you to name the marker. So I'm going to call this one Start. Might be a good name for that one. And I'm going to solo the second take. And that one starts over here. Let's zoom that one to a similar point so it looks. So all I'm going to do now is move this take further back in order to meet it. Now I can't currently move it further back because it starts at the very beginning of the project. So if I trim the beginning off. So when you move your cursor up and down the corner of the recording, you'll see several different icons appear. This one is to do a fade in, and this one is to edit. So now I'll just bring this one back, and now I'll be able to move this further back in time. So let's go back to our start marker. I'm going to zoom in, and we'll move this waveform. Ooh, not both of them. I'm still getting used to this software, having only downloaded it 2 days ago. And now they're both in time. So we should have a slightly easier time finding repair parts. I do know that these weren't performed at exactly the same tempo, so there still might be some shuffling to do later on. Just a word on terminology in a DAW. The name that most DAWs will give to the full length of the recording is a file. And that's nice and convenient because you can actually go out into Windows or your Mac operating system and find an actual file which is the same length and volume and all those kinds of things. As soon as you shorten or make an edit in any one of these files, that partial section of the file is usually referred to as either a clip or a region, depending on the software you're working in. In Cakewalk, it calls them clips. So I'm just going to go over to the point where my first edit needs to happen. So that's over here. So again, bear in mind the glitchiness. So it's that chord there. So I can see already that that chord is slightly earlier in the second take. So given that I don't need any of the earlier parts, I'm going to move this other take slightly later so it lines up a bit better. And then we can try doing a small edit. So there is a tool called the comping tool. I think from memory it looks like that. So if I move downwards and I do a drag like this. Now I don't want to go beyond that chord. So I'm just going to go up to that point there and then I'll re-edit this take to match. So at the moment this might sound a bit funny. So there's a little bit of a hiccup here. But if I move this part further back to meet it, okay, this will be a bit faster than I wanted it to be originally, but it might line up and might sound great. If it doesn't, then we might need to rethink ever so slightly. What I need to do now is just line up this edit with the one below it so we don't have two parts playing at the same time. I'm going to move along to the second part of the edit. Where are we? Here we go. Yeah, and they're lined up nicely. Now, you can see, if I zoom in a long way at this point here, this is something that's worth knowing. So, these crossed lines and diagonal lines are called fades. And if you move to the right point in the waveform, you can edit the fades. They take a longer time to fade in. And you can see the beginning of the waveform here is now quieter than it was when I had it back over here. Ultimately, we want these to fade from one to the other, from this take to this take. So this one is cross-fading from a muted part out of an unmuted part, whereas this one here is just fading in to the unmuted part. Doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason as to why it does various things. Again, I'm not very experienced with this particular software. It works quite a lot like Apple's Logic, this software, from experience. And it's important to have a crossfade at every edit point, otherwise you'll experience a click. Some software does crossfades under the bonnet without you having to think about it, and some, like Pro Tools, you have to make every crossfade manually. Cakewalk seems to want to make the fades automatically. I believe it's because this is automatically turned on. The tooltips are incorrect in quite a few cases, but this is the choice of types of fades that you can have. Linear fade in, linear fade out is the default, and I believe is that if that's turned off, it won't automatically crossfade and edit. So check that that's on before you start editing. So now I've moved that second edit along. This should line up a bit better. Yeah, lovely. I have noticed that this first recording sounds ever so slightly brighter than this one, which may well mean that I moved in relation to the microphone before I made the second recording. That's something that's important to remember. If you are performing several takes, you need to make sure that your position relative to the microphone changes as little as possible between takes. That's an awful lot easier if the microphone's a little bit further away. I've made quite a few suggestions over the last few videos to point out that microphones that are further away are a better idea if you can get away with it. Of course, having a really good room helps, which is why often having mics further away is only the preserve of excellent recording studios. But the more you can do to get the microphone further from you will make things like editing much easier. It'll also reduce the proximity effect and various other things I've mentioned earlier in the series. Right, we're going to move to our second edit point here now. So that was the one that I labelled as F1. I think it automatically named these actually, so there'll be another one around about here. That was the click. So maybe I can find that big E chord. I'm going to edit in just this chord here. Like that. Then I might need to realign this one like I did with the previous edit. Let's see how we're getting on now. Okay, there's a bit of a hiccup here, so we need to go and zoom in. So you'll start to get the hang of listening for the artifacts that you might create by editing poorly. And it does take quite a lot of practice as well. Let's try that. Still not quite. I'll just go back ever so slightly. Lovely. Next edit coming up. Yeah, made a bit of a mistake on that next D chord. Let's see if we can find that in this. Yep. Okay, so it starts here, but it's a little bit early compared to the take we're using, so we're going to move this part later. And then we'll comp from here. And again, it seems that take 2 was a little slower, so I'll just move that back to meet the transient. That's the name given to the louder part at the front end of a sound. It's a little bit messy, that. I'm going to go a little bit further back so the glitches are solved by the time it starts playing. Yes, not as neat as it could be. We'll try just shuffling that back a little bit. Ooh. I'm making the mistake of dragging without deselecting first a few times here, so that's worth noting in this particular software. The software I use mostly is Pro Tools, and unless you physically selected it yourself, a region or a clip won't be selected. So I'm not very used to how this one works. It seems when I select in the main track, it selects everything. There we go, that works well now, apart from the glitching. Let's now go back to the beginning. You can see that we've started with take 2, and then 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and finished with take 2. Of course, at the beginning, there's still this big 1, 2, this area we don't want here, so we can close that up by just getting rid of the front end on both takes, should we want to. And we can even fade that in just to be super tidy. There we go. And I'm going to close the take lanes. This button here fits the whole project in the window. It's also showing us where the edits are, which is very useful. And let's have a listen. So that last edit is still in need of some work. The rest of it's not my neatest work ever, but it's a brand new piece of software to me, slightly alien. But I hope it gives you an idea of what's possible with two different sounding takes that are played at ever so slightly different tempos. And it is possible to actually make a coherent piece of music out of it with a little bit of effort. So this will take quite a lot of practice. I recommend you have the manual of whichever DAW software you're using to hand. You're looking for terminology like regions and clips, which are the name of the partial sections of an audio file. You're looking for comping tools, comping between takes, so that's making a compilation of takes. You're looking for the waveform zoom function, so you can actually see it at a reasonable resolution. And you're looking for the fading tools and crossfading tools. Of course, at the end of this file here, I'd probably want to fade this out so I don't have an abrupt finish. Thanks for watching again, and if you found these videos useful, please share them to your friends, and I'll see you next time when we're going to be talking about using two microphones at the same time.